And good day. We are coming on the air as the suspect in the shooting outside of Saturday's White House Correspondents' Dinner, what the White House is calling an assassination attempt, is making his initial appearance in a Washington, D.C. courtroom right now. Authorities say 31-year-old Cole Tomas Allen rushed past a security checkpoint outside the dinner armed with multiple weapons, and he is accused of shooting a Secret Service agent. This video capturing him as he ran through a security checkpoint. His intended targets, allegedly the president and top cabinet officials. We expect to learn what the charges Allen will face shortly. Cameras are not allowed inside the courtroom, but our reporters inside will be sending us notes in real time that I will bring to you and our team will bring to you as soon as the hearing gets underway. So far, we know that Allen has been walked in to that courtroom right now. He is sitting, he is wearing a blue jumpsuit, and he is flanked by 2 U.S. Marshals that are on each side of him. We understand that the matter is now unsealed, that according to the judge who's just announced that in court. And the pretrial services are about to begin right now. Kelly O'Donnell joins our coverage now. Kelly, a quick question to you, because Saturday night after this happened, there were some announcements of 2 initial charges. Do we expect to hear those formally today, or will there be additional charges as well, do we expect?
Well, in the appearance today, when they say the matter is unsealed, they are now unsealing the charges against this 31-year-old California man. So this will be the first time we get a sense of those charges. Saturday night, there were some preliminary expected weapons-related charges. We think a lot of work has been done in the hours since then, going through the evidence both at the hotel where this event occurred, in his hotel room. He, of course, checked into the Washington Hilton Hotel in advance of the White House Correspondents' Dinner as a part of the alleged planning of this suspect. Also, he traveled from California on a train, a multi-day trip to get to Washington. We know, based on the weapons that were recovered, those were purchased legally. But as they explore his electronic footprint, they conducted searches at his California home and at the hotel. They've been piecing together evidence, and included were some writings he sent to his family that we have been able to review. They were provided to us by a senior White House official, and that describes some of his intention and thought. And that's why the White House has so comfortably labeled this an assassination attempt. We'll have to see if the charges bear that out in the specific details. Clearly, the man was armed, was moving toward the ballroom where the president and many other dignitaries were attending the dinner. 2,600 guests in a very crowded ballroom, many members of the cabinet, dignitaries, ambassadors from the U.S. and other countries were there. It was a high-profile event, which in and of itself could have been a target. But we understand from what authorities tell us was included in this writing to his family that he had intention talking about members of the Trump administration. He did not name President Trump, but some of what he wrote seemed to indicate he was alluding to President Trump and others who were serving in the administration. We will know much more when these documents are available to us. They have not been available yet. We would expect to see an FBI affidavit where an FBI agent swears to some of the initial evidence that's been brought before the court that helps to support whatever charges come. These will certainly be felonies. They are at the federal level. But this magistrate appearance today is the most beginning of these kinds of events. He may not enter any kind of a plea. This is simply telling him what the charges are against him. He is, at this point, supplied by counsel, federal defense counsel that is provided to him, public defender. And so it's an early step. But when we get those charging documents, the specifics of the complaint, will have more information. This may ultimately go to a grand jury where still more will come out. But this is a critical first step in what could be a long-time prosecution. In many of these potentially violent or terroristic type attacks, the suspect is, in many instances, is shot and killed or somehow loses his or her life in it. This is a more unusual case where the suspect was not injured. He was subdued at the hotel, and now he has rights and a process that begins. I'm being told 3 counts?
3 counts.
OK, let's look at those counts to get the specifics here.
Yeah, the attempt to assassinate the president, 3 counts on that, Kelly. The judge, when you were reporting, said there were several charges here. So this is going to be a little bit till we get everything in. And our team, again, is reporting from inside the courtroom back to me and Kelly. The cameras aren't allowed there. So far, all we know, he's been here comes more. An attempt to assassinate the president of the United States. It looks like 3 counts of that, Kelly, as we know. That, of course, you know, if he is convicted, that up to life in prison if he were to be found guilty. We're going to wait some more of this. We also learned he's 31 years old. He has a graduate degree, a master's degree, I should say. He pronounces his name Cole Tomas Allen. And as you said, he has asked the court to appoint him an attorney.
He's an educated suspect, Tom.
He is. Count two, transportation of a firearm and ammunition through the interstate commerce with intent to commit a felony. You were talking about that train trip. We know that he took a train from California all the way to Washington, Kelly?
That's correct. And that would account for taking firearms across state lines, lawfully purchased firearms, but taking them across state lines with an intent to commit a crime. That's its own kind of felony. So that explains that. The 3 counts of attempted assassination, I'll be curious to see if that ties with discharging his weapon. If he fired his weapon multiple times,
that's
that
count 3. It just came in. It
yes,
just came in. That's count 3. Yeah, so you're right about that. That one just came in. He has been fully briefed on these charges, and he says that he is aware of the charges against him.
And that will be a part of determining that he is capable of being in this process. We have seen in some instances where the mental acuity of a defendant is at issue. He is saying he understands his rights. He understands the charges against him. That's an important part of the process. At this point, these are very serious charges, of course, and it is against the backdrop of growing political violence in the country, Tom, something that President Trump has personally experienced with multiple attempts on his life, and many other figures across the political spectrum have had criminal acts against them for being in the political space. This is certainly a very notable case, one that stands out as we're learning more about the specifics here.
And as you mentioned something earlier, it sparked a reminder here. Initially, when this hearing started, the judge had asked him if he had taken any drugs, any medication, or any alcohol in the last 24 hours. He said he had not. And that is, part of the procedure here to make sure he understands the charges against him, Kelly.
And we know from investigators that they spoke to his brother and to his sister in authorities having interviews with investigators. The brother, when he received that emailed message to the family, did alert police in New London, Connecticut. And there was a connection from that local police department forwarding that information sort of across to federal partners and ultimately getting to the command center here in Washington that was dealing with the event at the Washington Hilton Hotel. So the family cooperated in that way. Authorities also tell me that the sister spoke about escalating rhetoric from her brother and that the family was concerned about the way he talked about world events, a variety of world events and national political events. We know from what others describe, he was engaged in a lot of that, had concerns about what was happening, and according to the document that we reviewed, had a sense that he needed to be the one to take action. More of that will play out. We'll have to learn more about the specifics, any mitigating facts that may come forward.
Kelly, we're now learning exactly what he was holding, according to the assistant U.S. attorney who's reading this now to the judge, a 12-gauge pump-action shotgun, a .38 caliber semi-automatic pistol, 3 knives, and, quote, other dangerous paraphernalia. The assistant U.S. attorney now asking the judge and requesting that there be no chance at bond for this suspect as it speaks because of the severity of the crimes. And speaking to that this was premeditated. It was planned before he got on that train from California to Washington, D.C., and that his intended target was to assassinate the President of the United States.
And that will be a case they will have to outline with specific information as they learn more from his writings, his social media profile, interviews they conduct with family members, those who know him, some of the facts on the scene. There's ballistic evidence that is being processed. There were bullet holes in a wall at the hotel. And a reminder to our audience, this suspect did not get to the ballroom level where those 2,600 guests were assembled, including the president, vice president, first lady, and many dignitaries. He was on a floor above that in a public space that had been used as part of the general reception for all of those guests. And there were layers of barricades and metal detectors and those kinds of steps. He was seen on video running through one of those metal detectors. After the event had begun and all other guests were assembled inside, he was subdued by a variety of officers there. There was a discharge of weapons. I'm told he fired his weapon and that there was return fire from law enforcement. And that is when the Uniform Division Secret Service officer was struck in the vest by some projectile. And he thankfully was not injured. He certainly took the full force of that, but he was only briefly at the hospital and then released. So no injuries here. The suspect was not injured. The president was safe as well.
And Kelly, I understand now from the notes that we're getting in court, there's going to be a detention hearing now at 11 a.m. this Thursday. His public defender has said that Mr. Allen has no prior arrests or convictions. And, of course, he would say this as his attorney. He is presumed innocent at the time. It sounds like they will have this detention hearing on Thursday as long as the judge signs off on it. So it sounds, at least in this case, things are moving pretty quickly in this case.
Exactly. And that's what we expected. This type of hearing, this first appearance, is very brief. No entrance of plea. The discussion of detention would come next. There would be a discussion, is there bail, is there not bail? The government will present its request for no bail opportunity. His defense counsel will have a chance to respond. He will now be in the custody of the U.S. Marshals. Prior to this, he'd been held by Washington Metropolitan Police prior to being charged as a federal defendant. They were able to hold him for a period of time simply on the suspicion of what happened Saturday night. There will be many steps to come and so much more to learn, Tom.
I want to bring in Tom Winter now, who covers law enforcement for us. Tom, there is so much evidence, at least from what federal investigators and Secret Service and our own reporting show, against this man right now. Talk to us about some of the key pieces we have. There's been talk of this manifesto. There's the surveillance video of him sprinting across that initial security checkpoint, and then him, of course, on the ground in handcuffs there at the scene with weapons allegedly on him.
You know, that's right, Tom, and that evidence is pretty strong, as it's been shared with us so far. It's 3 counts total here. So the key one is the attempt to assassinate the President of the United States. That does carry a life sentence if he's convicted to that, up to a life sentence. There's also count 3 there, that discharge of a firearm. That's a mandatory minimum if he's convicted of that. What they seem to have extrapolated is some intent. From that note that we've been reporting on, that's very clear, as you mentioned, a manifesto detailing the exact reasons why he was there. There's little room for interpretation. He specifically references the Trump administration and his whole game plan for how he was going to carry this out and his reasons for doing so. You've got this video that you're looking at right now, which we're going to start to see be played out shortly, where he will come running in from the left, going past the checkpoint. Here he is coming right now. You can see him dressed in all dark clothing, presumably holding a rifle there, just the way that he looks. That was as they were kind of breaking down the magnetometer and the checkpoint. Here he is lying on the ground shortly thereafter, after he's taken into custody and stripped to make sure he's got no other explosive devices on him. He is going to be held until that hearing. And one of the things that we'll get, Tom, in the coming couple of days, presumably a lot of detail in today's complaint. Once that is publicly filed to the docket, we will know more about that. But they will also file a detention memo from federal prosecutors where they can lay out some additional evidence that goes just beyond the basic requirements to bring these charges against them. And sometimes we can get a lot more information out of those filings. I will note, and some folks might point out, that there's a preliminary hearing scheduled for May 11th. That will almost assuredly not happen. He will likely be indicted by a federal grand jury well before that date. But because he's being arrested on what we call a complaint, they have to enter that date for there to be a hearing to see whether or not the evidence, weigh the evidence, rather, on this complaint. But the most serious charge is the first one, the attempted assassination of the President of the United States. This is now officially the 3rd attempted assassination against the president, Donald J. Trump. 2 attempts, of course, while he was a candidate for office. A 3rd one now that he is in office that apparently occurred, or allegedly occurred, according to the Justice Department, on Saturday night. Those 2 previous ones, one in Butler, Pennsylvania, Thomas Matthew Crooks, and then a second one near his golf course in Florida with Ryan Routh, who was convicted several months ago as a result of his federal trial there. Crooks, of course, was killed by a U.S. Secret Service sniper, counter-sniper, that was up on the roof at that incident. Unlike that first incident involving Crooks in Butler, Pennsylvania, we now have, Tom, to your point earlier, just a tremendous amount of evidence, because we have a note. With Crooks, we didn't have really any social media profile, no writings, nothing really left behind. Crooks is very clear here, as I mentioned before, and also discussed the security at the hotel. We see him there flanked by officers, this image being put out by the president on Saturday evening after he arrived back at the White House. But this is just a very different case than that. And obviously, they will continue their investigation, presumably continue to get surveillance video. Some, according to our colleagues, including Kelly O'Donnell, contains him going in through the stairwell to get down there so he's not detected in the elevators. Much more to come, Tom, I'm sure, as we continue to get these charges in.
And as we look back on those 3 assassinations attempts, this one marks the 3rd one. Tom, there's also that Pakistani man that is on trial. I believe he's still on trial, saying that Iran had hired him to kill President Trump and other administration officials as well. So there have been both plots and assassination attempts against the president's life. Tom, in that manifesto, do we know if it was just an MO, if you will, right, his modus operandi, or was there also a plan of attack in there as well? Did he lay out what he wanted to do? Because I've seen some reporting out there about, administration officials were the targets in sort of an order of importance.
That's exactly right. I mean, I think he understood, if you read this note, that this, in his eyes, was the best opportunity because he thought he could get closest to the president. That's what he says in the note. He also talks about the fact that he wanted to go after administration officials. I think he knew by the time he would get too close to where Trump was, he would have been confronted by law enforcement, but certainly was up for any sort of top officials. Interestingly, we don't know why he says that he was not going to go after the FBI director, Kash Patel, but he definitely seemed to go after administration officials. And that, big picture here, Tom, you referenced the charges against that Pakistani individual. We're not even talking about the threats that are investigated by the Secret Service, the threats that are prosecuted, let alone plots. And so now if you have individuals that think, maybe I can't get to Donald Trump, maybe I can get to other members of the Trump administration, the headache, not just for the Secret Service, but for the diplomatic security service that covers the State Department or for the military, for the Secretary of War, just the security posture that we now have to be in. And, oh, by the way, we're in the middle of a war. It's a really complex picture here going forward.
I want to bring in Danny Savalos. Danny, there's going to be a detention here, and we know this week. Do you see any scenario where this man is released from federal custody?
Zero. This is what you call a presumption case, and that even came up during the hearing, the very brief hearing today. Normally, the Bail Reform Act says that people have a presumption of bail when they appear before the magistrate. But there are certain cases in which there's a presumption that no set of circumstances or conditions will keep the public safe or ensure the defendant's appearance at trial. So this is what we call a presumption case. You've got guns. Those are usually presumptions. He will remain in custody no matter what happens in 3 days at the bail hearing.
All right, Danny Savalos, we thank you. I want to get quickly to Gabe Gutierrez, who's covering this from the White House. Gabe, the White House has come out today to highlight what happened on Saturday night, to talk about security and steps going forward. And it's really unclear how this event changes the president's schedule going forward and the events he holds, whether they be indoors or outdoors.
Yes, that's right, Tom. Look, the president has said that he wants to redo this dinner within the next 30 days or so. Right now, it's very unclear exactly how that will happen, what venue it would happen at. The White House is using this opportunity to try and make the case for why the president wants that massive ballroom that has been very controversial and has been tied up in the courts right now. That ballroom proposed to be 90,000 square feet, and the president saying private donations would cover it. It would only hold about 1,000 people, though. And as you heard earlier, the White House Correspondents Dinner, more than 2,000 people at that event. Now, just a short time ago, we heard from Caroline Leavitt. She says this week, Secret Service, DHS, and the White House Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles, will hold a meeting to discuss security moving forward, Tom.
Gabe Gutierrez, first, I want to thank Gabe and Danny and Tom and Kelly for their coverage. This is going to conclude this NBC News special report. A reminder, we're going to be back here in about an hour for a DOJ news conference on this same incident. And, of course, we'll have much more on our streaming network, NBC News Now, online at NBCNews.com, and a full wrap-up tonight on Nightly News. I'm Tom Yamas. We thank you for watching. We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.